Billionaire catches Black Maid hugging his disabled daughter, and then learns the shocking truth. The sound of shattering crystal echoed through the marble foyer of the Whitman estate, followed by a child's terrified scream that seemed to pierce every corner of the 60-room mansion. Brenda Washington dropped her cleaning supplies and ran toward the sound, her heart hammering against her ribs as she navigated the labyrinth of hallways she had memorized over the past 6 months. She found 8-year-old Isabella Whitman crumpled on the bathroom floor, her small body convulsing as blood pooled beneath her head where she had struck the edge of the marble vanity. The child's leg braces had twisted beneath her during the fall, and her eyes rolled back as she struggled to breathe through what looked like a seizure. Brenda didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees beside Isabella, cradling the child's head to prevent further injury while reaching for her phone to call 911. Isabella's body went rigid, then limp, then rigid again as the seizure consumed her small frame. "It's okay, baby girl," Brenda whispered, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her chest. "I've got you. You're safe now." She had seen seizures before, her own nephew had epilepsy, and she knew the importance of keeping Isabella's airway clear while protecting her from further harm. Brenda carefully positioned the child's head, using her own body as a barrier between Isabella and the sharp edges of the bathroom fixtures. That was exactly how Thomas Whitman found them 15 minutes later. The billionaire tech mogul stood frozen in the doorway of his daughter's bathroom, his face cycling through confusion, horror, and rage as he took in the scene before him. His 8-year-old daughter, his precious Isabella, born with spina bifida and dependent on leg braces to walk, was lying unconscious in the arms of their black housemaid, blood staining both their clothes. "What the hell did you do to her?" Thomas's voice cut through the air like a whip, low and deadly in a way that made Brenda's blood run cold. Brenda looked up from where she knelt, still holding Isabella protectively against her chest. "Mr. Whitman, she had a seizure. She fell and hit her head. I called 911. They should be here any. Get your hands off my daughter." Thomas stepped into the bathroom, his 6-foot frame filling the doorway as his gray eyes blazed with fury. "Get away from her right now." "Sir, she's still unconscious. I need to keep her head stable until—" "I said get away from her." Thomas lunged forward, grabbing Brenda's shoulders and pulling her away from Isabella with enough force to make her stumble backward. Isabella's small body slumped against the cold tile floor as Thomas gathered her into his arms, his hands shaking as he checked for a pulse. "Isabella? Baby, can you hear Daddy?" The child stirred slightly, a soft moan escaping her lips as consciousness slowly returned. Her dark eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused as she looked around the blood-stained bathroom. "Brenda!" Isabella's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried clearly in the tense silence. "Where's Brenda?" Thomas's face hardened as he looked at the woman who was now pressed against the bathroom wall, her uniform stained with his daughter's blood. "She's not your concern, Isabella. What happened? Did she hurt you?" Isabella's brow furrowed in confusion. "Hurt me? No, Daddy. She helped me. I fell down and everything went dark, and then Brenda was there holding me and telling me I was safe." But Thomas wasn't listening to his daughter's words. All he could see was the blood, the compromising position he had found them in, and the fact that his vulnerable disabled child had been alone with a woman he barely knew, a woman whose background check had revealed a criminal record he had chosen to overlook 6 months ago when his previous housekeeping service had failed him. The sound of sirens grew louder as paramedics arrived at the estate. Thomas held Isabella tighter, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper as he looked at Brenda. "Pack your things," he said. "You're done here. I want you out of my house within the hour." Brenda felt the words hit her like physical blows. "Mr. Whitman, please. I would never hurt Isabella. I love that little girl like—" "Like what?" Thomas's voice cracked with something between grief and rage. Like she's your own daughter? She's not. She's mine. And I won't have someone with your background around her anymore. The paramedics burst into the bathroom then, professional and efficient as they assessed Isabella's condition. Thomas stepped back to give them room, but his eyes never left Brenda's face. The seizure lasted about 3 minutes, Brenda told the paramedics, her voice professional despite her trembling hands. She hit her head on the vanity edge when she fell. I kept her head stable and made sure her airways stayed clear. One of the paramedics nodded approvingly. You did exactly right. That probably prevented a much more serious injury. But Thomas heard only betrayal in her words, saw only danger in her presence. As the paramedics carefully loaded Isabella onto a stretcher, the little girl reached out toward Brenda with desperate, grasping fingers. Don't let her go, Daddy, Isabella pleaded, her voice weak but urgent. Brenda saved me. She always saves me. Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach at his daughter's words, but his anger burned hotter than his confusion. She's leaving, Isabella. And she's never coming back. As Brenda gathered her cleaning supplies with shaking hands, she caught Isabella's eyes one last time. The little girl was crying now, tears streaming down her pale cheeks as the paramedics wheeled her toward the ambulance. I love you, baby girl, Brenda whispered, knowing Isabella couldn't hear her over the commotion but needing to say the words anyway. What Thomas Whitman didn't know, what he couldn't have known as he watched Brenda walk out of his mansion and out of his daughter's life, was that he had just fired the only person who truly understood what Isabella needed. The only person who had noticed the subtle signs that Isabella's seizures were getting worse. The only person who had been secretly documenting the concerning symptoms that Isabella's actual nanny, Rachel Sterling, had been deliberately hiding from him. And as Brenda drove away from the only job that had ever felt like more than work, she carried with her a secret that would have changed everything. Isabella's seizures weren't random. They were being triggered by the medication that Rachel had been secretly giving the child, medication that was slowly poisoning Thomas's daughter while Rachel positioned herself to inherit everything when the tragic accident finally claimed Isabella's life. But Thomas would learn that truth soon enough. And when he did, he would move heaven and earth to bring Brenda Washington back into their lives. Because some bonds between a protector and a child run deeper than blood, stronger than misunderstanding, and more powerful than the prejudices that try to tear them apart. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Drop it in the comments below. It always amazes me how far these stories travel, from the US to Canada, the UK, Africa, and beyond. And while you're here, don't forget to hit subscribe and give this video a like so you won't miss the next story. Now let's get started. Have you ever been misunderstood when you were trying to do the right thing? Sometimes our greatest acts of love are mistaken for their opposite. Share in the comments about a time when your good intentions were questioned. The studio apartment above Rodriguez's bakery smelled like cinnamon and desperation, two scents that had become Brenda Washington's constant companions since losing her job at the Whitman estate 3 days ago. She sat at her second-hand kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills that had grown taller while her savings account had grown emptier, trying to calculate how many weeks she could survive on the money she had left. 42 years old, and she was starting over again. Brenda had been starting over her entire life. First when her mother died of cancer when she was 16, then when her husband Marcus left her for a younger woman 5 years ago, taking their joint savings and leaving her with nothing but debt and a broken heart. She had worked her way up from gas station attendant to hotel housekeeper to private domestic worker, each job a stepping stone toward the stability that always seemed just out of reach. But the Whitman position had been different. For 6 months, she had walked through those marble hallways not as hired help, but as something closer to family. Isabella had made sure of that. The little girl had attached herself to Brenda from the first day, following her around the mansion with her uneven gait, asking endless questions about everything from why soap bubbles were round to whether angels needed wheelchairs. Isabella's curiosity was boundless, her spirit unbroken despite the spina bifida that made every step a struggle and the seizure disorder that cast shadows over her bright world. Brenda understood Isabella in ways that Thomas Whitman never could, because Brenda had grown up with a disabled brother. She knew the frustration of a child whose body betrayed her dreams, the isolation that came from being different, the fierce independence that developed as a shield against pity. She had recognized these things in Isabella immediately and had made it her mission to nurture the child's strength while protecting her vulnerability. What Thomas had seen as inappropriate attachment, Brenda had known was something much more precious. Love without conditions, acceptance without judgment, the kind of bond that formed when two souls recognized their shared humanity despite different circumstances. The truth was, Brenda had never had children of her own. Marcus had promised they would start a family someday, but someday had never come, and by the time he left, Brenda was 40 and facing the reality that motherhood might not be in her future. Isabella had awakened something in her that she hadn't known was sleeping, the fierce protectiveness of a mother, the unconditional love that would sacrifice anything for a child's well-being. Now, sitting in her tiny apartment with unpaid bills scattered across her table, Brenda felt the weight of that love like a physical ache. She worried about Isabella constantly. Who was monitoring her seizures? Who was noticing the subtle changes in her behavior that preceded an episode? Who was making sure she took her real medication instead of whatever Rachel Sterling had been secretly substituting? Rachel Sterling. Even thinking the woman's name made Brenda's jaw clench with anger. Thomas's girlfriend was everything Brenda was not: young, blonde, beautiful, and utterly without genuine emotion. Rachel had moved into the Whitman estate 8 months ago, supposedly as Isabella's live-in nanny, but Brenda had quickly realized that Rachel's primary interest was in Thomas's bank account, not his daughter's well-being. Over the past 6 months, Brenda had documented dozens of concerning incidents in a small notebook she kept hidden in her cleaning supplies. Rachel forgetting to give Isabella her seizure medication. Rachel locking Isabella in her room for hours as punishment for minor infractions. Rachel telling the child that her father was embarrassed by her disability and wished she had never been born. But most disturbing was what Brenda had discovered 2 weeks ago when she found Rachel crushing pills in the estate's kitchen. Pills that looked nothing like Isabella's prescribed medication but that were being put into the child's daily pill organizer. When Brenda had confronted Rachel about it, the younger woman had claimed they were vitamins, but something about her shifty eyes and defensive posture had set off every alarm bell in Brenda's mind. That night, Brenda had researched the pills using the numbers stamped on them. What she discovered made her blood run cold. They were psychiatric medications, powerful drugs designed to treat severe mental illness in adults, completely inappropriate and potentially lethal for a child with Isabella's medical conditions. Brenda had been planning to approach Thomas about her concerns when Isabella's seizure had changed everything. Now, she was locked out of the estate, banned from contact with Isabella, and helpless to protect the child who had become the daughter of her heart. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor Mrs. Chen. "Saw the news about your boss's daughter. Terrible thing. Hope you're doing okay." Brenda frowned and opened her news app. The headline hit her like a punch to the stomach. Tech billionaire's disabled daughter hospitalized after suspicious incident with former employee. The article was brief but devastating, painting Brenda as a disgruntled former employee who had been let go under questionable circumstances after Isabella's unexplained seizure. It mentioned Brenda's criminal record, a shoplifting charge from 20 years ago when she had been desperate and unemployed, and quoted sources close to the family suggesting that Isabella's injuries might not have been accidental. The sources, Brenda was certain, were Rachel Sterling. As Brenda read the article, Her phone began ringing with calls from unknown numbers. Reporters, she realized, wanting her side of the story. She declined them all, knowing that anything she said would only make the situation worse. But as the afternoon wore on and the calls kept coming, Brenda began to understand the full scope of what Rachel had orchestrated. This wasn't just about getting Brenda fired, it was about destroying her reputation so completely that even if Thomas discovered the truth about the medication, no one would believe a word Brenda said. Rachel was covering her tracks, eliminating witnesses, preparing for the final phase of whatever plan she had been implementing. And Isabella, sweet trusting Isabella, was caught in the middle, vulnerable and unprotected. That evening, as Brenda sat in her darkened apartment trying to figure out her next move, she received an unexpected visitor. The knock on her door was soft but persistent, and when she opened it, she found Carl Rodriguez, the groundskeeper from the Whitman estate. Carl was a quiet man in his 50s, someone Brenda had exchanged pleasantries with over the months but never really gotten to know. He stood in her doorway now, his weathered face grave with concern. "Ms. Washington," he said quietly, "we need to talk. It's about Isabella, and about what Miss Rachel has been doing when Mr. Whitman isn't home." Brenda felt hope flutter in her chest for the first time in days. "You've seen it too?" Carl nodded grimly. "I've seen enough. And if we don't do something soon, that little girl is going to end up dead, and everyone will think it was just another tragic accident." As Brenda let Carl into her apartment, both of them carrying pieces of the puzzle that would expose Rachel's true nature, neither of them could have known that 3 miles away, Isabella was lying in her hospital bed, asking every nurse who entered her room the same heartbreaking question: when is Brenda coming back? Because love, once planted in a child's heart, doesn't disappear just because adults make terrible decisions. And sometimes, the people who care most about a child are the ones who are willing to risk everything to keep them safe, even when the whole world is telling them to walk away. Sometimes the people who love our children most aren't the ones related by blood. Have you ever had someone outside your family show extraordinary care for your child? Share your thoughts about the different ways people become family. Carl Rodriguez sat in Brenda's tiny kitchen, his calloused hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The groundskeeper's weathered face was etched with worry as he pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "I found this in the estate's garbage yesterday," he said, smoothing the paper on Brenda's table. Miss Rachel threw it away, but the wind blew it out of the bin. Brenda leaned forward, squinting at the handwritten note. It was a prescription pad from Dr. Marcus Webb, Isabella's neurologist, but the medication listed wasn't any seizure medication she recognized. Instead, it was for chlorpromazine, a powerful antipsychotic that Brenda knew from her research was dangerous for children and could cause exactly the kind of seizures Isabella had been experiencing. "This isn't her real prescription," Brenda whispered, her heart racing. "I've been giving Isabella her seizure medication for months. This is something completely different." Carl nodded grimly. "There's more. I've been watching Miss Rachel when Mr. Whitman travels for business. She doesn't just give Isabella the wrong pills, she increases the dosage when the seizures don't happen fast enough." The implications hit Brenda like a freight train. Rachel wasn't just neglecting Isabella, she was actively poisoning her, using medications that would cause seizures, brain damage, and eventually death. All while positioning herself as the devoted girlfriend who was helping Thomas cope with his daughter's deteriorating condition. "We have to tell Mr. Whitman," Brenda said, reaching for her phone. "With what proof?" Carl asked sadly. "A prescription paper from the trash and the word of 2 employees he already distrusts? Miss Rachel is smart. She's been building her story for months, telling everyone how difficult Isabella has become, how the seizures are getting worse despite the best medical care." Brenda felt the walls closing in around her. "So we just let her kill that little girl?" "No," Carl said firmly. We get proof he can't ignore. Over the next hour, Carl revealed the extent of what he had witnessed during his 8 years working at the Whitman estate. Rachel sneaking into Isabella's room at night to switch her medications. Rachel researching life insurance policies on her laptop while Isabella played nearby. Rachel making phone calls to lawyers about inheritance procedures and guardianship transfers. She's been planning this since the day she moved in, Carl said. Mr. Whitman was vulnerable after his wife's death, desperate for someone to help with Isabella. Miss Rachel saw an opportunity and took it. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Carl pulled out his ancient cell phone and scrolled to a video file. I record the garden birds for my granddaughter, he explained. But last week, I accidentally left it running when I went inside for lunch. Look what it captured. The video showed Rachel in the estate's garden, talking on her phone while Isabella played nearby. The audio was clear enough to hear Rachel's side of the conversation. The doctor says the new medication should trigger more frequent episodes. Yes, I know it's risky, but it has to look natural. Once she's gone, Thomas will need someone to help him through his grief. No, the maid was getting too close, but I handled that situation. Brenda's blood ran cold as she listened to Rachel casually discussing Isabella's murder like it was a business transaction. The little girl's life, her joy, her trust, all of it was just an obstacle to Rachel's financial goals. This is evidence of attempted murder, Brenda said, her voice shaking with rage. We have to take this to the police. But even as she spoke, Brenda's phone buzzed with a news alert that made her stomach drop. The headline read, Whitman Estate Employee Under Investigation for Child Endangerment. The article detailed how Thomas Whitman had filed a police report expressing concerns about Brenda's suspicious behavior around his daughter, including inappropriate physical contact and unstable emotional attachment. It mentioned her criminal record prominently and quoted Rachel Sterling as saying she had always felt uncomfortable with how obsessed the maid seemed with Isabella. She's ahead of us, Carl said grimly, reading over Brenda's shoulder. Now, if we come forward with accusations, it looks like we're trying to deflect blame. Brenda stared at her phone, watching her reputation crumble in real time. Comments on the article were already calling her everything from predator to gold digger, and she realized that Rachel had managed to turn her love for Isabella into something twisted and suspicious. There has to be another way, Brenda said desperately. Someone else who's seen what Rachel is doing. Someone Thomas will believe. Carl was quiet for a moment, then said, There is someone. Dr. Patricia Hayes, Isabella's original neurologist. Miss Rachel convinced Mr. Whitman to switch to Dr. Webb, said the little girl needed more specialized care. But Dr. Hayes has been asking questions about why Isabella's conditions suddenly got worse after the medication change. Hope flickered in Brenda's chest. Would she listen to us? She might, especially if we show her Carl's video and explain about the medication switch. But their planning was interrupted by a sharp knock on Brenda's door. Through the peephole, she could see 2 police officers standing in the hallway, their expressions grim and professional. Ms. Washington? We need to speak with you about the incident at the Whitman residence. Brenda's heart hammered as she opened the door. The officers were polite but firm, explaining that they needed her to come to the station for questioning regarding allegations of inappropriate conduct with a minor. You're not under arrest, the female officer explained, but Mr. Whitman has raised some serious concerns, and we need to investigate them thoroughly. As Brenda gathered her jacket and purse, she caught Carl's eyes. The groundskeeper gave her a subtle nod. He would contact Dr. Hayes, he would guard the evidence, he would do everything possible to protect Isabella while Brenda dealt with the legal nightmare Rachel had created. But as the police car pulled away from Rodriguez's bakery, Brenda couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Every day Isabella remained in Rachel's care was another day closer to the tragic accident that would make Rachel Sterling a very wealthy woman. What Brenda didn't know was that at that very moment, 3 miles away in Isabella's hospital room, the little girl was asking her father a question that would plant the first seeds of doubt in Thomas Whitman's mind. "Daddy, why does Rachel's special medicine make me feel so dizzy and scared? Brenda's medicine never made me feel like that." Thomas had dismissed the comment as post-seizure confusion, but something about his daughter's earnest expression stayed with him. Something that would make him start paying closer attention to the woman he had trusted with his child's life, and the woman he had banished for loving her too much. The truth was fighting to surface, despite Rachel's careful manipulations. And when it finally broke free, it would change everything for everyone involved. Sometimes the people who seem most trustworthy are the ones with the most to hide. Have you ever had to question someone you thought you could trust completely? Share in the comments about recognizing red flags in people who seemed perfect. The fluorescent lights in the police station interrogation room buzzed with the persistent hum of institutional neglect, casting harsh shadows across Detective Maria Santos's weathered face as she reviewed Brenda's file. Across the metal table, Brenda sat with her hands folded, trying to project calm while her mind raced through worst-case scenarios. "Ms. Washington," Detective Santos began, her voice professionally neutral, "Mr. Whitman has raised some serious concerns about your behavior around his daughter. He claims you showed an unhealthy attachment to the child, that you were found in compromising positions with her on multiple occasions." Brenda felt her stomach clench. "Detective, I was Isabella's caregiver for 6 months. Part of my job was helping her with personal care, mobility assistance, seizure management. Everything I did was appropriate and necessary. But Mr. Whitman says you overstepped boundaries. That you acted more like a parent than an employee." Detective Santos consulted her notes. "He mentions finding you holding his daughter inappropriately, giving her unauthorized medication, making decisions about her care without consulting him." "I never gave Isabella unauthorized medication," Brenda said firmly. "I followed her prescription exactly as written. And if I held her, it was because she was having a seizure or had fallen. Would you prefer I left a disabled child on the floor?" Detective Santos studied Brenda's face, searching for signs of deception. "Mr. Whitman also mentioned your criminal record. Shoplifting 20 years ago. I was 19, unemployed, and desperate. I stole baby formula because I was babysitting my nephew and there wasn't money for food. I served my community service, paid my fine, and learned my lesson." Brenda met the detective's eyes steadily. "Detective, I understand why Mr. Whitman is concerned. He loves his daughter and wants to protect her. But he's being manipulated by someone who doesn't have Isabella's best interests at heart." "You mean Ms. Sterling, his girlfriend?" Brenda hesitated, knowing that anything she said about Rachel would sound like the accusations of a bitter former employee. "Detective, I'm going to tell you something that will be hard to believe, but I'm asking you to investigate it thoroughly. Rachel Sterling has been systematically poisoning Isabella with psychiatric medications that cause seizures." Detective Santos's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" "I have documentation of Isabella's symptoms, inconsistencies in her medication, and evidence that Rachel has been researching inheritance law and life insurance policies." Brenda pulled out the notebook she had kept hidden in her cleaning supplies. "Everything is in here. Dates, times, observations." The detective flipped through the notebook, her expression growing more serious as she read Brenda's careful documentation. Detailed accounts of Isabella's seizure patterns, notes about medication discrepancies, observations about Rachel's behavior when Thomas was away on business. "Why didn't you report this sooner?" Detective Santos asked. "Because I'm a black housekeeper with a criminal record making accusations against a wealthy white woman who's about to marry my former employer. Who would believe me? Brenda's voice carried the weight of harsh experience. I was trying to gather enough evidence to present to Mr. Whitman himself, but then Isabella had that seizure and everything changed. Detective Santos closed the notebook and studied Brenda carefully. Ms. Washington, these are serious allegations. If they're false, you could face charges for defamation and making false reports. If they're true. She trailed off, the implications hanging in the air. Then a little girl's life is in danger, Brenda finished. The interrogation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Another detective entered and whispered something to Detective Santos that made her expression grow grave. Ms. Washington, there's been a development. Isabella Whitman was just readmitted to the hospital. Another seizure, more severe than the last one. The doctors are saying her condition is deteriorating rapidly. Brenda felt the room spin around her. She's getting worse because Rachel is increasing the dosage. Detective, please, you have to get Isabella away from her before it's too late. We can't act on suspicions alone, Detective Santos said. But I'm going to assign someone to look into your claims. In the meantime, I'm releasing you, but you're not to go near the Whitman estate or attempt to contact Isabella or her father. As Brenda left the police station, she felt the weight of helplessness crushing down on her. Isabella was in the hospital, vulnerable and alone, while Rachel no doubt played the role of concerned stepmother-to-be, positioning herself as the only stable influence in Thomas's life. Her phone buzzed with a text from Carl. Need to meet. Found something important. They met at a diner 20 minutes later, Carl sliding into the booth across from her with a manila envelope clutched in his weathered hands. I got into Miss Rachel's room while she was at the hospital, he said quietly. Found this hidden in her closet. The envelope contained printouts of life insurance policies, inheritance documents, and most damning of all, email correspondence with a private investigator she had hired to research Thomas's assets and Isabella's medical history. Look at this one, Carl said, pointing to an email dated 3 months ago. She specifically asked about how long it would take for Thomas to remarry after a child's death, whether there were any legal complications with inheriting as a step-parent versus a biological parent. Brenda read the emails with growing horror. Rachel had been planning Isabella's death with the cold calculation of a business transaction, researching every legal angle to ensure she would inherit everything when Thomas was too grief-stricken to think clearly. There's more, Carl said, pulling out a small plastic bag. I found these in her bathroom. They're the real seizure medications, the ones Isabella should have been taking. Miss Rachel has been throwing them away and substituting the psychiatric drugs. The evidence was overwhelming, but Brenda knew it still might not be enough. Rachel was smart, careful, and had the advantage of being Thomas's trusted partner rather than a dismissed employee with a grudge. We need Dr. Hayes, Brenda said. She's the only one who can definitively prove what these medications would do to Isabella. But as they sat in the diner making plans, Brenda's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, a small, weak voice made her heart break. Brenda? It's me. Isabella. Baby girl, how did you get this phone? I took Daddy's phone when he was sleeping. Brenda, I'm scared. Rachel gave me my medicine again and it made me feel funny, and now the doctors want to do more tests because they say my brain is sick. Brenda closed her eyes, fighting back tears. Isabella, listen to me very carefully. When Rachel gives you medicine, can you pretend to take it but hide it instead? Can you be very sneaky about it? Like a spy game? Exactly like a spy game. And Isabella, if any doctors ask you questions about your medicine, tell them exactly what Rachel gives you and how it makes you feel, okay? Okay, Brenda. When are you coming back? I miss you so much, and Daddy won't tell me why you went away. I'm working very hard to come back, baby girl. But until I do, you have to be the bravest, smartest little girl in the world. Can you do that for me? I can do it. I love you, Brenda. I love you too, sweetheart. So much. The line went dead, leaving Brenda staring at her phone with tears streaming down her face. Across the table, Carl reached over and squeezed her hand. We're going to save her, he said quietly. Whatever it takes. But as they sat in that diner, making plans to expose Rachel's crimes, neither of them could have known that Rachel had been listening to the entire conversation through the baby monitor she had hidden in Isabella's hospital room, a monitor that allowed her to hear every word Isabella said, including her phone call to the woman who refused to disappear from their lives. The war for Isabella's life was escalating, and Rachel Sterling was about to make her most dangerous move yet. Sometimes protecting a child means risking everything, even when the odds are stacked against you. Have you ever had to fight a system that seemed designed to work against the vulnerable? Share your thoughts about standing up for those who can't protect themselves. The pediatric ICU at St. Mary's Hospital hummed with the quiet efficiency of machines keeping fragile lives tethered to the world. Isabella lay in bed 7, surrounded by monitors that beeped and flashed with alarming frequency, her small body dwarfed by the medical equipment that had become her constant companions over the past 48 hours. Thomas Whitman sat in the chair beside her bed, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled after 2 days without sleep. His daughter's latest seizure had been the worst yet, lasting nearly 8 minutes and requiring emergency intervention to stop. The neurologist, Dr. Marcus Webb, had painted a grim picture of Isabella's deteriorating condition. Her brain activity is showing increased irregularities, Dr. Webb had explained earlier that morning. We may need to consider more aggressive treatments, possibly even surgical intervention if the seizures continue to worsen. Rachel Sterling stood at the foot of the bed, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the hospital setting, her expression a masterpiece of concerned devotion. She had barely left Thomas's side since Isabella's admission, playing the role of supportive partner with Academy Award precision. The important thing is that we're here for her, Rachel said softly, placing a manicured hand on Thomas's shoulder. Whatever she needs, whatever it takes. But Isabella, despite her weakened condition, was more alert than the adults realized. The 8-year-old had heard every whispered conversation, every worried discussion about her prognosis, and most importantly, she had been following Brenda's instructions about the spy game. Hidden under her pillow was a small collection of pills, the special medicine that Rachel had been giving her during their private moments, when Thomas stepped out for coffee or took phone calls. Isabella had become an expert at pretending to swallow them while actually tucking them into her cheek, then spitting them out when Rachel wasn't looking. And something remarkable had happened since she started refusing Rachel's medicine. The scary, dizzy feeling had started to fade, her thoughts were clearer, and she hadn't had any of the small seizures that usually preceded the big ones. "Daddy," Isabella said weakly, drawing Thomas's attention. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "What is it?" Isabella glanced at Rachel, then back to her father. "Why did Brenda have to go away?" "I miss her." Thomas felt his chest tighten. Over the past 2 days, Isabella had asked about Brenda repeatedly, and each time, Thomas had struggled to explain why the woman who had obviously cared for his daughter was no longer part of their lives. "Isabella, Brenda had to leave because Daddy was worried about some things," he said carefully. "But you don't need to worry about that now. You just need to focus on getting better." "But I was getting better when Brenda was here," Isabella insisted, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "I didn't have as many scary dreams, and my medicine didn't make me feel sick." Rachel stepped forward quickly. "Sweetheart, you're confused because you're not feeling well. Brenda gave you the wrong medicine sometimes, remember? That's why Daddy had to ask her to leave." Isabella's dark eyes fixed on Rachel with startling clarity. "No, she didn't. Brenda always checked my pill box 3 times before giving me anything. You're the one who gives me different pills, Rachel. The ones that make me feel funny. The room fell silent except for the beeping of monitors. Thomas looked between his daughter and his girlfriend, seeing something in Isabella's expression that made his stomach clench with unease. "What different pills, Isabella?" he asked quietly. Rachel laughed nervously. "Thomas, she's confused from the seizures. Children often mix up memories when they're not feeling well." But Isabella wasn't deterred. With the determination that had carried her through years of medical procedures and physical therapy, she reached under her pillow and pulled out the small collection of pills she had been hiding. "These pills," she said, holding them out to her father. "Rachel said they were my regular medicine, but they don't look like the ones Brenda used to give me. And they taste different too." Thomas took the pills from his daughter's small hand, his heart racing as he examined them. They were white and round, completely different from Isabella's prescribed seizure medication, which was yellow and oblong. He looked at the numbers stamped on the pills, then at Rachel, whose face had gone pale. "Rachel," he said slowly, "what are these?" I don't know," Rachel stammered. "Maybe the pharmacy made a mistake. Maybe they gave us the wrong prescription." But Thomas was already pulling out his phone, photographing the pills and searching for the drug identification number. What he found made his blood run cold. Chlorpromazine, an antipsychotic medication used to treat severe mental illness in adults. A drug that could cause seizures, brain damage, and death when given to children, especially children with Isabella's medical conditions. "Rachel," Thomas's voice was deadly quiet. "Why does my daughter have antipsychotic medication hidden under her pillow?" "Thomas, I can explain." "Explain what?" "Explain why you've been poisoning my daughter." The words hung in the air like an accusation that couldn't be taken back. Thomas looked at Rachel, really looked at her, and for the first time saw past the beautiful facade to the calculating coldness underneath. "It's not what you think," Rachel said desperately. "The doctor prescribed them. Dr. Webb said Isabella needed something stronger for her behavioral issues." "What behavioral issues?" Thomas demanded. "Isabella doesn't have behavioral issues. She's never needed psychiatric medication." Rachel's carefully constructed mask was cracking, revealing the panic beneath. "Thomas, you're overreacting. You're under stress because of Isabella's condition." "My condition got worse when Rachel started giving me the new medicine," Isabella interrupted, her young voice cutting through Rachel's lies with brutal honesty. "Daddy, I've been pretending to take them like Brenda taught me in our spy game. And guess what? I feel so much better when I don't take Rachel's pills." The pieces clicked into place in Thomas's mind with horrifying clarity. Isabella's seizures had indeed worsened after Rachel moved in. Her personality had changed, becoming more withdrawn and fearful. The medical appointments that Rachel insisted on handling alone, the medication changes that Dr. Webb supposedly recommended but that Thomas never discussed with him directly. "Get out," Thomas said quietly, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Thomas, please, let me explain. Get out of this room. Get out of my house. Get away from my daughter." Thomas stood up, his 6-foot frame towering over Rachel. "If you're not gone from my property within the hour, I'm calling the police." Rachel's mask fell away completely then, revealing the venomous hatred she had been hiding for months. "You'll regret this, Thomas. You have no idea what I'm capable of. That little brat has ruined everything, but this isn't over." "You're right," Thomas said coldly. "It's not over. Because I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you tried to do to my daughter." As Rachel stormed out of the hospital room, Thomas sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had almost happened. His girlfriend, the woman he had trusted with his daughter's life, the woman he had been considering marrying, had been systematically poisoning Isabella for months, probably planning to inherit his fortune after the child's tragic death from her medical conditions. Isabella reached out and took her father's hand with her small fingers. "Daddy, does this mean Brenda can come back now?" Thomas looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, and saw intelligence and wisdom that had been clouded by months of medication that should never have been in her system. He thought about Brenda, about how she had thrown herself between Isabella and danger without hesitation, about how she had been documenting symptoms and concerns while he had been blind to the threat living under his own roof. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, pulling out his phone to call Detective Santos. "Brenda can come back. In fact, I think it's time I apologize to her for not believing her when she tried to protect you." As Thomas made the calls that would bring justice for his daughter and vindication for the woman who had loved her enough to risk everything, Isabella smiled for the first time in weeks. A real smile, unclouded by pharmaceutical fog, bright with the hope that her family was finally going to be whole again. Sometimes the people who seem most concerned about a child's welfare are the ones actively harming them. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was not who they appeared to be? Share your thoughts about recognizing manipulation in those closest to us. The media storm hit like a hurricane at dawn, 3 days after Rachel Sterling's arrest for attempted murder and child endangerment. Brenda woke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly with calls from reporters, her small apartment under siege by news vans and photographers who had somehow tracked down her address. "Ms. Washington, can you tell us about your relationship with Isabella Whitman? Were you romantically involved with Thomas Whitman? How does it feel to be vindicated after being falsely accused?" Brenda pressed herself against her kitchen wall, staying away from the windows as camera flashes strobed through her thin curtains. She had expected some media attention after Rachel's arrest, but nothing had prepared her for the feeding frenzy that erupted when the story went national. The headlines were a mix of vindication and exploitation. "Heroic housekeeper saves disabled child from poisoning plot," ran alongside "The Billionaire," "The Maid," and "The Murder Scheme." Her photo, an old one from her arrest 20 years ago, was splashed across tabloids next to glamour shots of Rachel Sterling and paparazzi images of Thomas Whitman. Detective Santos had called the night before to update Brenda on the investigation. Rachel's apartment had yielded a treasure trove of evidence: detailed plans for Isabella's gradual murder, research into Thomas's assets, correspondence with lawyers about inheritance law, and most damning of all, a journal documenting her systematic poisoning of the child. "She's been planning this for over a year," Detective Santos had explained. "She researched Thomas's finances before she ever applied for the nanny position. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, it was a calculated, long-term scheme." But vindication came with its own price. Along with the reporters camped outside her building, Brenda was receiving dozens of phone calls from strangers, some supportive, others hostile. Social media was equally divided, with some hailing her as a hero while others questioned her motives and suggested she had orchestrated the entire situation for money or fame. The worst part was being separated from Isabella. The little girl was recovering well in the hospital, her system slowly clearing of the psychiatric medications that had been poisoning her for months. Thomas had called twice to thank Brenda and assure her that Isabella was asking for her constantly, but the media circus made any reunion impossible for now. "I want to bring you to see her," Thomas had said during their last conversation. "But my lawyers are advising against it until the trial is over. They're worried about how it might look, about what Rachel's defense team might try to claim about our relationship." Brenda understood the legal reasoning, but understanding didn't make the separation any less painful. Every night she lay awake wondering if Isabella was scared, if she was having nightmares, if she understood why Brenda couldn't be there to hold her hand through another medical procedure. On the 4th day of the media siege, Brenda's situation took a turn for the worse. A knock on her door revealed not another reporter, but her landlord, Mr. Rodriguez, his face apologetic but firm. "Brenda, I'm sorry, but I have to ask you to leave," he said quietly. "The other tenants are complaining about the noise, the cameras. It's bad for business." "Mr. Rodriguez, please. This isn't my fault. I can't control the media attention. I know that, and I'm sorry. But I have a business to run, other tenants to consider. I'll give you your security deposit back, but I need you out by the end of the week." As Brenda watched her landlord walk away, the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. She was unemployed, soon to be homeless, and trapped in her apartment by a media circus she never wanted. The vindication she had dreamed of had become another kind of prison. Her phone rang, and she answered without checking the caller ID, hoping it might be Thomas with news about Isabella. "Ms. Washington? This is Margaret Cross from Cross Media Management. I represent celebrities and public figures in high-profile situations like yours." "I'm not a celebrity," Brenda said wearily. "You are now, whether you like it or not. The question is whether you're going to control your narrative or let others control it for you." Margaret explained that she could help Brenda monetize her story, book deals, television interviews, speaking engagements about child protection and domestic violence. The numbers she quoted were staggering, enough to set Brenda up for life. "I don't want money from this," Brenda said. "I just want to see Isabella. And that's exactly why your story is so valuable. You're the real thing, someone who acted out of love, not self-interest. But if you don't tell your story, others will tell it for you, and they won't be as kind." After Margaret hung up, Brenda sat in her darkened apartment, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. Outside, the reporters continued their vigil, turning her life into entertainment for millions of strangers. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you won, but this isn't over. That brat will get what's coming to her, and so will you." The message was followed by a photo, Isabella's hospital room, taken from the hallway, showing the little girl sleeping peacefully in her bed. Brenda's blood ran cold as she realized that Rachel still had allies, people willing to threaten a disabled child even while Rachel sat in jail awaiting trial. She immediately called Detective Santos, but the call went to voicemail. As evening fell, Brenda made a decision that would change everything. She called Thomas directly, breaking the lawyer's advice against contact. "Thomas, I just received a threatening message about Isabella. Someone photographed her in her hospital room." "What? When?" "Today. The text came from an untraceable number, but someone is still targeting her." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Brenda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. Do you love my daughter?" The question caught Brenda off guard. "Thomas, Please, just answer the question." "Yes," she said quietly. "I love Isabella like she's my own daughter. I would die before I let anyone hurt her." "Then come home," Thomas said simply. "I don't care what the lawyers say, I don't care what the media thinks. Isabella needs you, and apparently, we still need to protect her. Can you get out of your apartment without the reporters seeing you?" Brenda looked toward her fire escape, her heart racing with hope and fear. "I think so. Carl is already on his way to pick you up. It's time to bring our family back together." As Brenda gathered her few belongings and prepared to slip out into the night, she thought about Isabella lying alone in that hospital bed, vulnerable to threats from Rachel's unknown allies. The media had painted this as a story with a happy ending, but Brenda knew the truth. The darkest hour was just beginning. Because some people would rather see a child dead than admit they were wrong, and Rachel Sterling had spent months building a network of corruption that extended far beyond her own actions. But Brenda was done running, done hiding, done letting other people control her story. It was time to fight back, not just for her own vindication, but for the little girl who had become the center of her universe. Sometimes victory comes with its own dangers, and protecting those we love means facing threats we never anticipated. Have you ever found that solving one problem created new challenges you hadn't expected? Share your thoughts about navigating the complexities of doing the right thing. Carl's pickup truck idled in the alley behind Rodriguez's bakery at 11:47 p.m., its headlights cutting through the darkness as Brenda made her way down the fire escape with a single duffel bag containing everything she owned. The media circus had finally quieted for the night, but she could see the silhouettes of news vans still parked on the street, their occupants probably sleeping in shifts to ensure they didn't miss any developments in the story that had captivated the nation. "Thank God," Carl muttered as Brenda slipped into the passenger seat. "Mr. Whitman has been pacing the hospital corridors for 3 hours, and Isabella hasn't stopped asking for you since she woke up from her afternoon nap." As they drove through the empty streets towards St. Mary's Hospital, Carl filled Brenda in on the developments she had missed while trapped in her apartment. Rachel's arrest had triggered a cascade of revelations that painted an even darker picture of her crimes. The FBI got involved when they found out she's been running similar cons in 3 other states, Carl explained, always targeting wealthy widowers with disabled children. She's got at least 2 other suspicious deaths under investigation. Brenda felt sick. How many children has she hurt? They don't know yet, but they found communications between her and Dr. Webb. He was taking bribes to falsify medical records and prescribe inappropriate medications. The whole thing goes deeper than anyone realized. When they arrived at the hospital, Thomas was waiting in the lobby, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled from days of worry and sleepless nights. When he saw Brenda, relief flooded his features. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "I owe you an apology that I can never fully make. I failed Isabella, and I failed you." Brenda looked at this man who had once thrown her out of his house in rage, who had accused her of harming the child she loved, and saw genuine remorse in his eyes. "Thomas, you were protecting your daughter the only way you knew how. Any parent would have done the same." "No," he said firmly. "Any parent would have listened when someone who clearly loved their child tried to warn them about danger. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment, and Isabella almost died because of it." They rode the elevator to the pediatric ward in silence, both lost in thoughts about how close they had come to losing the little girl who had brought them together. When they reached Isabella's room, Thomas paused with his hand on the door handle. "She's been asking for you constantly," he said quietly. "The nurses say she cries every time someone new comes in because she thinks it might be you. She needs you, Brenda." "We both do." When the door opened and Isabella saw Brenda standing in the doorway, the little girl's face lit up with a joy so pure it took Brenda's breath away. Despite the 4 lines and monitoring equipment, Isabella tried to sit up in bed, her arms reaching out desperately. "Brenda, you came back. I knew you would come back." Brenda rushed to the bedside and gathered Isabella into her arms, feeling the child's small body shake with sobs of relief. "I'm here, baby girl. I'm here, and I'm never leaving you again." "I was so scared," Isabella whispered against Brenda's shoulder. "Rachel was giving me bad medicine, and Daddy didn't believe me, and I thought you were never coming back." "Oh, sweetheart," Brenda murmured, stroking Isabella's hair. "You were so brave. You saved yourself by not taking those pills, by telling the truth even when it was hard. You're the strongest little girl I know." Thomas watched this reunion with tears in his eyes, finally understanding the depth of the bond between Brenda and his daughter. This wasn't the inappropriate attachment he had feared, it was love in its purest form, the kind of unconditional devotion that would sacrifice everything for a child's well-being. Dr. Patricia Hayes, Isabella's original neurologist who had been brought back to oversee her recovery, entered the room carrying a clipboard full of test results. Her expression was cautiously optimistic. "The good news," she announced, "is that Isabella's brain scans are showing remarkable improvement. Now that the chlorpromazine is out of her system, her seizure activity has decreased dramatically. With proper medication and therapy, she should make a full recovery." "And the bad news?" Thomas asked. "There may be some lasting effects from the months of poisoning, memory issues, possible learning difficulties. We won't know the full extent until we can do more comprehensive testing." Dr. Hayes looked at Isabella, who was still clinging to Brenda. "But having a stable, loving support system will be crucial for her recovery." Over the next hour, as Isabella slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Thomas and Brenda sat in the chairs beside her bed, finally able to have the conversation that should have happened months ago. "I need you to know that I'm prepared to face whatever legal consequences come from my accusations," Thomas said quietly. "My lawyers are already working on clearing your record completely, and I want to make sure you're compensated for everything you've lost." Brenda shook her head. "I don't want your money, Thomas. I just want Isabella to be safe and healthy." "Then what do you want?" Brenda looked at the sleeping child, her heart full of love and determination. "I want to be part of her life, officially. Not as an employee, but as someone who has legal rights to protect her if anything like this ever happens again." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, processing what she was asking. "You want to adopt her?" "I want us to co-parent her," Brenda clarified. "You're her father and you love her. But she needs advocates who will never stop fighting for her, people who understand that her disability doesn't make her less valuable or less deserving of protection." "Legal guardianship," Thomas said thoughtfully. "Shared custody. Yes, I think that could work." As they talked through the logistics of creating a legal framework that would protect Isabella and ensure she always had advocates willing to fight for her, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the hallway. Dr. Marcus Webb had arrived for his night shift, unaware that his role in Rachel's conspiracy had been exposed. He approached Isabella's room intending to check on his patient, but the conversation he overheard through the partially open door made him realize that his freedom was about to end. Webb had been taking bribes from Rachel for months, falsifying medical records and prescribing dangerous medications. When Rachel was arrested, he had hoped to quietly distance himself from the situation, but now he understood that the investigation would inevitably lead to him. As he listened to Thomas and Brenda discuss Isabella's recovery and their plans for the future, Webb made a desperate decision. If he was going down, he would take them all with him. Rachel might have failed to eliminate the child who threatened their scheme, but he still had access to the hospital's medication supplies. One fatal dose of insulin, delivered during a routine check, would look like a tragic complication from Isabella's existing medical conditions. By the time anyone realized what had happened, Webb would be long gone, having disappeared into the night with the money Rachel had already paid him. But what Webb didn't know was that Carl had recognized him from Rachel's apartment building, where the groundskeeper had seen the doctor meeting secretly with Rachel on multiple occasions. Carl had followed Webb to the hospital, and he was already on the phone with Detective Santos, reporting the doctor's presence near Isabella's room. The turning point had arrived, not just in Isabella's recovery, but in the final confrontation between those who would protect her and those who still sought to harm her. Sometimes the people we trust most with our children's lives are the ones who pose the greatest danger. How do we balance necessary trust with vigilant protection? Share your thoughts about recognizing when professional authority is being abused. Dr. Marcus Webb's hand trembled as he prepared the insulin injection in the hospital's medication room, his years of medical training warring against the desperation that drove him toward this final, irreversible act. The syringe contained enough insulin to send Isabella into fatal hypoglycemic shock within minutes, a death that would appear to be a tragic complication of her existing medical condition rather than murder. He had already disabled the security camera in this section of the corridor, claiming routine maintenance, and the night shift was skeleton-staffed. If he moved quickly, he could administer the injection and be gone before anyone realized what had happened. But as Webb made his way down the dimly lit hallway toward Isabella's room, he failed to notice the figure following him at a distance. Carl Rodriguez had been tracking the doctor's movements since he arrived at the hospital, and the groundskeeper's years of military service had taught him how to move silently when the situation demanded it. When Webb reached for the handle of Isabella's door, Carl's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Doctor." Webb spun around, the syringe still clutched in his hand, his face pale with shock at being discovered. "Carl? What are you doing here?" "Making sure you don't hurt that little girl any more than you already have." Carl stepped into the light, his weathered face set with grim determination. "The police are on their way, Doctor. Detective Santos knows all about your arrangement with Rachel Sterling." Webb's composure cracked completely. "You don't understand. I never wanted to hurt Isabella. Rachel said it would just make her sick enough to need more medical care, bring in more insurance money. I never knew she was planning to kill her." "But you knew the medications you prescribed were dangerous for a child," Carl said steadily. "You knew they would cause seizures, brain damage. You took money to poison an innocent little girl, and now you're here to finish what Rachel started." Webb looked at the syringe in his hand, then at the door that separated him from Isabella's room, where the child slept peacefully under Brenda's protective watch. For a moment, his medical oath warred with his desperation, and Carl saw the exact instant when desperation won. Webb lunged toward the door handle, but Carl was ready. The older man's military reflexes kicked in as he tackled Webb, sending both men crashing to the floor. The syringe flew from Webb's hand, skittering across the linoleum as the two men struggled. The commotion drew Thomas and Brenda from Isabella's room, both of them rushing into the hallway to find Carl pinning Webb to the ground while the doctor thrashed desperately beneath him. "He had a syringe," Carl panted, nodding toward the insulin injection that lay broken on the floor. "Was coming for Isabella." Thomas's face went white with rage as he realized how close they had come to losing Isabella again. "Call security," he told Brenda, "and get Detective Santos on the phone." Within minutes, the hospital corridor was flooded with security guards, police officers, and medical staff. Detective Santos arrived to find Webb handcuffed and confessing everything in a desperate attempt to negotiate a plea deal. "Rachel paid me $50,000 to misdiagnose Isabella and prescribe inappropriate medications," Webb sobbed as the detective took his statement. "She said it was just to make the child sicker, to justify more medical intervention. I never knew she was planning murder." "But you came here tonight to kill Isabella yourself," Detective Santos pointed out. "That's attempted murder, Doctor. Your own crime, not Rachel's." As Webb was led away in handcuffs, Isabella woke to find her room full of police officers and medical staff. But instead of being frightened, she seemed remarkably calm as Brenda explained that the bad people who had been trying to hurt her were all gone now. "Does this mean I can go home soon?" Isabella asked hopefully. Dr. Patricia Hayes, who had been monitoring the situation, smiled as she checked Isabella's latest test results. "Actually, I think we can discharge you tomorrow. Your body has cleared all the toxic medications, and your brain function is returning to normal. With proper seizure medication and regular monitoring, you should be able to live a completely normal life." The next morning brought a different kind of media attention. Instead of sensationalized headlines about scandal and conspiracy, the news focused on Isabella's recovery and the heroic actions of those who had protected her. "Child saved. Hospital staff and groundskeeper prevent final attack on poison girl. Conspiracy exposed. Doctor and girlfriend charged in plot to murder billionaire's disabled daughter. Hero housekeeper. Woman who lost job for protecting child gets last laugh." But for the small family gathered in Isabella's hospital room as she prepared to go home, the headlines mattered far less than the papers. Thomas was having his lawyers prepare legal documents that would give Brenda joint custody of Isabella and official recognition as the child's co-parent and advocate. "Are you sure about this?" Brenda asked as she reviewed the custody agreement. "It's a big responsibility, and it legally ties us together for the next 10 years at minimum." Thomas looked at his daughter, who was chattering excitedly about all the things she wanted to show Brenda when they got home, and smiled. "Brenda, for the past week, I've watched Isabella transform from a sick, frightened child into the vibrant little girl she was always meant to be. That happened because you never stopped fighting for her, even when everyone told you to give up." He paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. "I can't think of anyone I'd rather have watching over my daughter's future. You've already proven you love her enough to sacrifice everything for her well-being." As they prepared to leave the hospital, Isabella insisted on walking to the car herself, her leg braces clicking against the floor with determination. She had refused the wheelchair, declaring that she was strong enough to walk on her own now that the bad medicine was out of her system. Carl met them at the hospital entrance, his pickup truck freshly washed for the occasion. The media was there too, but this time the questions were respectful, focused on Isabella's recovery and the family's plans for the future. "Ms. Washington," one reporter called out, "what's next for you and Isabella?" Brenda looked at the little girl who had changed her life, at Thomas who had learned to see past his prejudices, and at Carl who had risked everything to protect them all. "What's next is going home," she said simply. "Being a family. Making sure Isabella has every opportunity to grow up strong and healthy and loved." As their car pulled away from the hospital, Isabella sat between Brenda and Thomas in the back seat, her small hands holding theirs tightly. "Brenda," she said thoughtfully, "are you going to be my mom now?" Brenda felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm going to be whatever you need me to be, baby girl. Always." "Good," Isabella said with satisfaction, "because I picked you a long time ago. I was just waiting for Daddy to figure it out." Thomas laughed despite his tears, finally understanding that his daughter had known all along what it had taken him months to realize. That family isn't defined by blood or law or social convention, but by love, commitment, and the willingness to fight for each other no matter what obstacles stand in the way. Sometimes the family we choose is stronger than the one we're born into. Have you ever found that the most important relationships in your life came from unexpected places? Share your thoughts about how love creates bonds that transcend traditional definitions of family. 2 years later, the morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Whitman Estates breakfast room, illuminating a scene that would have been impossible to imagine during those dark days when Rachel Sterling had cast her shadow over their lives. Isabella, now 10 years old and thriving, sat at the kitchen island helping Brenda prepare pancakes for their Saturday morning tradition, her leg braces barely slowing her down as she moved with confident purpose. "Brenda Mom," Isabella said, using the name she had coined to distinguish between her two parental figures, "can we make the pancakes shaped like butterflies today? I want to take pictures for my school presentation about metamorphosis." Brenda smiled as she handed Isabella the special molds they used for occasions like this. The little girl's appetite for learning had returned full force once the psychiatric medications had cleared her system, and she was now thriving in a specialized school program that accommodated both her physical needs and her remarkably sharp intellect. "Butterfly pancakes sound perfect," Brenda agreed. "And after breakfast, we can work on the garden project you wanted to start for your science fair." Thomas entered the kitchen carrying his laptop and a stack of newspapers, his Saturday morning ritual of reviewing business reports temporarily forgotten as he watched his daughter and Brenda work together with the easy partnership that had developed over the past 2 years. The custody arrangement had been finalized 18 months ago, with both Thomas and Brenda granted full parental rights and responsibilities. Isabella spent her weekdays at the estate with both her parents and weekends alternating between special outings with Thomas and quiet bonding time with Brenda in the small apartment she maintained for their private moments together. The arrangement was unconventional by traditional standards, but it worked perfectly for their unique family. Thomas provided stability, resources, and unwavering love, while Brenda offered the specialized care and advocacy that Isabella needed as a disabled child navigating a world that didn't always understand her challenges. "Any interesting news this morning?" Brenda asked as Thomas settled at the breakfast bar with his coffee. "Actually, yes," Thomas said, his expression growing serious. "Rachel's trial finally concluded yesterday. She was sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. Dr. Webb got 15 years for his role in the conspiracy." Isabella looked up from her pancake making with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children often brought to difficult topics. "Good," she said simply. "Now other kids won't get hurt by them." Over the past 2 years, the investigation into Rachel's crimes had revealed a network of similar schemes stretching across multiple states. She had targeted wealthy single fathers with disabled or chronically ill children, always positioning herself as the devoted caregiver while systematically poisoning her victims for financial gain. Isabella's case had become the keystone that brought down the entire operation, leading to the prosecution of corrupt doctors, fake caregivers, and unethical lawyers who had enabled Rachel's crimes. The little girl's courage in speaking truth to power had saved not just her own life, but the lives of other vulnerable children who might have become Rachel's future victims. "There's something else," Thomas continued, pulling out a thick envelope from beneath his newspapers. The state legislature passed a new law requiring background checks and psychological evaluations for all in-home caregivers of disabled children. They're calling it the Isabella Protection Act. Brenda felt tears prick her eyes as she understood the significance of this legislation. Isabella's suffering had been transformed into protection for other children, her story becoming a catalyst for systemic change that would prevent future tragedies. "Does this mean I'm famous?" Isabella asked with the kind of innocent curiosity that always made the adults around her smile. "It means you're a hero," Brenda said, pulling Isabella into a gentle hug. "You helped make the world safer for kids like you." The morning continued with their usual Saturday routine, butterfly pancakes followed by a trip to the garden where Isabella was growing vegetables for her school's science fair. Carl, now officially employed as the estate's head groundskeeper and Isabella's part-time mobility coach, joined them for the gardening session. "Miss Isabella," Carl said as he watched her carefully transplant seedlings with modified tools designed for her grip strength, "you've got the best green thumb I've ever seen. These tomatoes are going to win first prize for sure." Isabella beamed with pride as she showed off the neat rows of vegetables she had been nurturing for months. The garden had become her special project, a place where she could demonstrate that disability didn't limit her ability to create and nurture life. As the afternoon wore on, the family settled into the living room for Isabella's favorite Saturday activity, movie time with homemade popcorn and hot chocolate. But instead of a Disney film, Isabella had chosen a documentary about accessibility advocacy, her interests having evolved far beyond typical childhood entertainment. "I want to be like Temple Grandin when I grow up," Isabella announced during a commercial break. "She's autistic and she designs things to help animals, and she doesn't let anyone tell her she can't do something because she's different." Thomas and Brenda exchanged glances over Isabella's head, both of them marveling at how their daughter's experiences had shaped her into a fierce advocate for others facing similar challenges. "I think you'd be an amazing advocate," Thomas said. "You've already helped change laws to protect other children. And you've shown everyone that being different doesn't mean being less capable," Brenda added. "You're going to do incredible things with your life." That evening, As Isabella prepared for bed with the independence she had fought so hard to maintain, she asked the question that had become part of their nightly routine. "Brenda, you're never going to leave me, right?" "Never," Brenda replied, tucking the covers around Isabella's small frame. "We're a family now, legally and forever. Nothing and no one can change that." "And Daddy loves me even though I'm different?" "Your daddy loves you because of who you are, not despite it," Brenda assured her. "Your differences make you special, not less valuable." Isabella smiled sleepily, her dark eyes already growing heavy. "I'm glad you hugged me that day when I had the seizure. Even though Daddy got mad, it was the best thing that ever happened to us." As Brenda turned out the lights and quietly closed Isabella's door, she found Thomas waiting in the hallway with 2 glasses of wine and a contemplative expression. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked as they settled onto the back patio overlooking the gardens where Isabella's vegetables grew in neat, productive rows. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Thomas said. 2 years ago, I was so focused on protecting Isabella from imagined threats that I almost lost her to a real one. I let my prejudices blind me to the truth that was right in front of me." Brenda sipped her wine, considering his words. "We all make mistakes when we're trying to protect the people we love. What matters is that we learned from them." "Have you ever regretted it?" Thomas asked. "Taking on the responsibility of raising someone else's child? Having your life completely changed by a custody arrangement that ties you to us for the next 8 years?" Brenda looked through the window at Isabella's bedroom, where a nightlight cast gentle shadows on the walls covered with the little girl's artwork, academic certificates, and photos of their unconventional but deeply loving family. "Thomas," she said softly, "Isabella isn't someone else's child. She's our daughter. She chose me that first day when she followed me around asking questions about everything, and I chose her back when I decided her well-being was worth more than my job security." She paused, watching fireflies begin their nightly dance in the garden. "This arrangement didn't tie me to anything I didn't want. It gave me legal recognition of something that was already true. I'm Isabella's mother, in every way that matters." As they sat together in comfortable silence, both of them processing the journey that had brought them to this moment of peace and security, Isabella's voice drifted down from her bedroom window where she was talking to herself as she often did before falling asleep. "Dear Diary," they heard her say in the voice she used for important pronouncements, "today I learned that butterfly pancakes taste better when you make them with people who love you. I also learned that heroes aren't people who wear capes. They're people who hug you when you're scared and fight for you even when other people don't understand." Thomas and Brenda smiled at each other, both of them understanding that Isabella's innocent wisdom had captured the truth of their situation perfectly. They were heroes to each other, not because they had performed grand gestures or made dramatic sacrifices, but because they had chosen love over fear, truth over prejudice, and family over convention. The little girl who had once been vulnerable and voiceless now slept safely upstairs, surrounded by people who would move heaven and earth to protect her. The woman who had once been dismissed as just the help was now legally recognized as a mother and advocate. The man who had once let bias cloud his judgment had learned to see beyond surface differences to the heart of what truly mattered. As the evening settled around them and Isabella's soft breathing could be heard through the open window, all 3 members of their unconventional family rested in the security of knowing that love, once properly recognized and legally protected, was strong enough to overcome any challenge that might arise. Some families are born from shared DNA, others from shared commitment. But the strongest families of all are built from both love and law, ensuring that the bonds forged by choice are every bit as unbreakable as those created by blood. What defines a real family in your experience? Genetics, legal documents, or something deeper? Sometimes the most important relationships in our lives are the ones we choose rather than the ones we're born into. Share your thoughts about the different ways love creates lasting bonds.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.